The passage today is Acts 27, verses 13 to 32. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called the northeaster, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island named Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. Because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete, and then you would have spared yourself this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed." Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen, just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island." On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, when at about midnight the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with you, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. So Paul was one of the members on this boat, and he was in pretty much the worst case scenario. There was no good answer, no good outcome for him. It was either he was still a prisoner and survived, or he died. He would have had every right to lash out, to close himself off, to break down, to be hurt and angry. But instead in the situation, he spoke to God about it. And he didn't just speak to God for himself, but he interceded for all of the others on the boat, even those who were keeping him captive. And when he spoke to God and heard from God, he could speak with such strong authority that even the centurions, the ones who had power over him and were holding him there, listened, which is a complete power reversal. So what's the secret to this? How did he manage to speak with such influence and authority? It was just not of his ability or of his might. You know, he was a prisoner. He was the very bottom of the bottom. So whose ability was it? So let's take a look at God. So God didn't need to save these people. He didn't need to save the sailors or the soldiers or anybody on that boat. You know, they were actively working to undermine him and undermine his kingdom and taking his friend Paul to be killed. But he chose to intervene, and he chose to intervene so that none of them would die, and he loved them regardless of what they were doing. So I was thinking about us and about how actually God doesn't need us. He has every right to leave us and be like, "Look, it's all in the Bible. I'm going to take a step back. I'm not going to talk to you. You can figure it out yourselves." He could be silent and has every right to do so, but he's not. Jesus has already done everything that he needs to do in order to take away our sin and leave chance for us to come into union with God. But instead, he does something nonsensical. God reaches out and forms a relationship with us. He chases us relentlessly every day, every second of every day, even when he doesn't have to. He chooses us even when like the soldiers and like the centurions, we turn our backs on him and we work for our own interests. He pursues us not out of obligation, not because he has to, but out of a love for who we as individuals are. So I reckon Paul was able to look outwards to the people around him to support them so selflessly because he first looked up. I'm sure he was absolutely terrified on this ship, but he spoke clarity into the situation and put others first, and at the end of the day, they all survived because of God's might and God using Paul and his obedience. So what I'd encourage you to do, if you want to be like Paul and be able to speak into situations with power and see miraculous things happen, is actually just to rest in God's love. We can't ever understand it fully, not fully because it's so large and so magnificent, but because of that, it's sure to change everything. It will encompass every aspect of our lives, all the fun stuff, all the boring stuff, and it will spread out into every single person that we meet. So this week, see if you can find some time to bask in God's presence. Rest there, spend time with him, and this can look like so many different things. And I encourage you to ask for love, even if you don't feel like you deserve it, because God's desperate for you. He's chasing you today and he really wants a relationship with you.